Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode, and I want to talk about how 45 there was a study done back in 2016. They looked at recreationally active women, and they found that 45% of them may be of underfueling. And I want to hit on, I agree with that. But the fix isn't always just eating more calories, because I think that's where people tend to go when they hear this is, hey, we need to increase calories when they hear underfueling. But there's a lot of other things that can go into that. And so I want to dive into that. And even though this is 45% of recreationally active women, this applies to men as well too. Definitely, even though it's specifically women here, this can translate over to men, and I'll definitely hit on that. With that out of the way, though, let's first go, before I dive into that, though, let's talk about my free body recomp checklist. So in this checklist, I go over two different types of body recomp, why it's important to focus on body composition, what is body recomp, and then the 10 things you need for a body recomp. So if you're interested in that, check that out. The link to that is in the show notes. Also have spots open for the rest of February and beginning of March for my one-on-one coaching. So if you are interested in these types of things, body recomp, performance, health, you want to add some muscle, you want to lose some body fat, you want to do both, you want to improve your performance, you want to see how we bridge the gap between all three of those, then my coaching program is for you. So you can go check it out. There's a link to check out the coaching program. You can reach out to me on Instagram to find out more. With those things out of the way, let's dive into today's topic. I came across a really cool study. It looked at 109 women they had them fill out it's called LEAF-Q, right? So low energy availability in females questionnaire. And we'll talk about what low energy ability is, but it's essentially an equation that looks at someone's fat-free mass, so their muscle. It looks at how many calories they're taking in and what they're expending from training, right? And then it's an equation that looks at, hey, you want to be at a certain threshold. If you're not, you're going to start to notice some issues in terms of what people would commonly think of as metabolic adaptation there. So again, just downregulation in metabolism, other issues from like a bone health perspective, menstrual cycle irregularities, etc. And so in this questionnaire, there's questions that talk about menstrual cycle. They talk about other things, stress fractures, etc. in this questionnaire. And out of these 109 people, they found that 45% of them were at risk for low energy availability. And then this obviously went up the more they trained per week there. And then anyone who had any sort of stress fracture in the past was at a higher risk. And they did find that individual sport athletes had higher risk than team sport athletes there. So again, individual would just be if you don't play a team sport and you do things from a body composition standpoint, or if you are an athlete, anything that's, again, I would lump bodybuilding into that. I would lump any sort of like dance, things like that, any sort of individual thing where you have to manipulate weight, etc. there. And again, remember, this was done in recreational exercises, though, not elite athletes. So we're just talking everyday people who enjoy training there. So I would lump anyone who likes to train, is into fitness, into this. 45% are at risk there. That's a pretty good amount, especially considering when we look at the general population, the problem is energy overload, right? People are consuming too many calories, they're not moving enough. But when you start to niche down into our sort of demographic, people that are going to listen to this, people that exercise, we do run into issues now where people are not fueling enough. And again, I don't think we can extrapolate this to the general population for that reason there. So I think my main takeaway here, number one, with this, before we dive into anything else, is active women are going to be at risk for underfueling. I think this comes from the sort of, obviously, dieting culture for women specifically, and in general, right? Like I said, I think some of this can also transfer over to men as well too, maybe slightly less, but again, you're still going to run into these issues there. But again, dieting culture, being skinny, being smaller, always dieting, these are going to be things that are going to put someone at a higher risk of under consuming calories, right? And underfueling. And as I'll make the case, it's not necessarily just calories that we're looking at here. I think there's other things that we need to look at besides just calories. So that's my main takeaway. Number one is if you are active and you train regularly, just understand that from a female perspective, you are at risk for underfueling. At least there's a 1 in 2 chance that you're at risk of that. And again, I think it comes back to these things. And just also because being active, not only are those things going to happen, people are going to push to be skinnier. They're going to push to be leaner, smaller, always dieting, eating less food. The other risk on top of that is the fact that people are exercising on top of that, which is going to increase your needs for fuel and certain nutrients. And there's obviously the recovery side of things that we need to look at there. So now I want to so I brought up the concept of low energy availability. Okay. And so this is, as I talked about, it's a research term based on an equation around exercise activity and calories in and fat-free mass, right? This has dominated this sort of literature over the last, really as long as this has been around, right? This is when you look at the female athlete triad, that's again, this is around women that are, again, more so in like just active women in general. In talking about menstrual cycle irregularities, bone health, things around that there. And like I said, it's an equation, and this is what led to things like RED-S, which is relative energy deficiency in sport, which was originally proposed by the IOC in 2014 and recently updated in 2023. And again, the model describes how low energy availability causes a wide range of deleterious health and performance outcomes in athletes there. And so again, the energy availability is the big part of the RED-S, right? Essentially just not fueling enough for basic bodily functions. And this is going to lead to health and performance detriments for women and for athletes. However, recently, the 2026, 2025 female athlete triad, the new paper came out in the last couple of months. And one of the things that they did was they moved from low energy availability to energy deficiency. Because I think the big thing with low energy availability that we're going to run into is it's an equation, right? So it's a calculation. Again, it's energy intake minus exercise calories normalized to fat-free mass. And so there's a couple issues with this, right? One, intake is hard to measure accurately. We've talked about this before, but a lot of people are going to underreport or even overreport calories. There's just a lot of noise when it comes to calorie tracking that if that's what we're going to base it off of, we already know that could be off by a ton. So it's like people could think that this could go two ways, right? They could think that they have low energy availability from a calorie standpoint, because the equation shows that they're super low. But we need to dive deeper than that and see, are they potentially overlooking other things like micronutrient deficiencies, which we'll dive into, is there stress, et cetera, right? So it's like one of those things where, yeah, you could be low based on that, but now you think you need to add more calories, but maybe that's not necessarily the play there. There's other things going on, and this is why we want to look at symptoms and not just an equation. But on the flip side, this could also, if you over-report calories and think you're consuming more, now you're going to show up as it being higher, and then you think, oh, I'm good because the low energy availability equation says that I'm at the threshold, I'm good to go. But then maybe there's symptoms of energy where you're low energy availability, you actually have that, you're not actually eating enough calories for that there. And then not to mention on that, so there's that. So we can overreport, underreport, and we went over how that could be problematic. But then there's also exercise expenditure, which is also often estimated poorly. So now you could again overreport, same thing, right? You could overreport how much your exercise you're expending, how many calories you're expending. And again, there's a lot of things that go into play with that could alter how many calories you're actually expending your training or exercise there. So again, that can overshoot or undershoot these numbers. And we're basing our decisions off of what a number says. And I think we need to look into things further than that. And then again, exercise activity can swing wildly from day to day, and a single number doesn't reflect what's happening hormonally and physiologically. And so you can have normal energy availability on paper and still be in trouble from a physiological standpoint, right? So we need to look into things a little bit deeper. So that's why the female athlete triad went away from that and more so looked at energy deficiency there. What does energy efficiency capture that maybe energy availability misses? So energy deficiency, it zooms out. Instead of asking, are calories minus exercise above threshold, it's more so, does the body have enough energy to support everything it needs to do? So we're looking at training, recovery, hormone production, bone remodeling, reproduction, growth and repair. Here's the catch too with this is that energy deficiency can show up even when body weight is stable, calories seem reasonable, and training hasn't changed, right? And it starts to pick up on some of these things that could actually become problematic there. So they introduced metabolic compensation as a defining feature of energy deficiency, right? It's how the body will adapt when energy is tight. So instead of shutting things down overnight, it will quietly reallocates energy, right? So common signs would be suppressed resting metabolic rate, so just a lower total daily energy expenditure, low normal T3, which is your thyroid hormone, and that's the active thyroid hormone that you'd want to look at. Higher ghrelin, reduced reproductive hormone output. And again, all this can happen without weight loss. They can look fine, they can weigh the same, but they can still be in this state. And that's why we need to look at patterns, not single metrics. And we need to look at biofeedback here for women and men too, right? Like I said, this is also relevant for men as well too. And then we also have, before I dive into that, my takeaway number 2 is more calories aren't always the answer here in the state. Just because maybe women may be underfueling, it may not necessarily be a calorie thing that needs to increase. We need to look a little bit deeper than this. And then takeaway 3 so far, weight being stable doesn't mean you're eating enough either. This is where I just did my episode on artificially low maintenance calories. And that's where a lot of people in this state will find, right? Whether they're over reporting calories, under reporting, again, maybe someone's looking at their weight and be like, hey, I'm at maintenance because my weight's staying stable. But you may still have this suppressed metabolic rate because of that and because of some of these other things, which brings me into the third paper I want to talk about. And that's Does relative energy deficiency in sport, REDS syndrome, exist? And this is an awesome paper where essentially what they look at in this, and I'm just going to read this here, is the consensus IOC 2023 is that energy availability, which is at the core of REDS syndrome, is impossible to measure accurately enough in the field, and therefore the only way to diagnose an athlete with REDS appears to be by studying symptom presentation and risk factors. However, the symptoms are rather generic, and the cause is likely multifactorial. Here we discuss that one, is very difficult to isolate the effects of low energy availability from other potential causes of the same symptoms. Two, the model is grounded in the idea that one factor causes symptoms rather than a combination of factors adding up to the etiology. For example, the model does not allow for high allostatic load to explain symptoms. Three, the REDS diagnosis is by definition biased because one is trying to prove that the correct diagnosis is REDS by excluding other potential causes there. Four, observational and cross-sectional studies have typically been short duration, less than 7 days, and do not address the long-term problematic LEA as described in the IOC 2023 consensus statement. Five, the evidence is not as convincing as it's sometimes believed to be. Many practitioners believe REDS is well established. Very few studies can demonstrate causality between low energy availability and symptoms. Most studies demonstrate associations, and there's a worrying number of reviews on the topic relative to original research. Here we suggest that the athlete is best served by an unbiased approach that places health at the center, leaving open all possible explanations for the presented symptoms. And so essentially they're trying to make the point that there's other things at play here that could be going into this, right? And so they're looking at total stress on the system, right? Training, life stress, sleep, nutrition, psychological load, they all stack together. And so even when calorie intake looks reasonable on paper, the body can still experience energy deficiency if demand exceeds recovery, right? So this is allostatic load, this is total stress load on the body, right? There's multiple different things that can impact this. It can be training, it could be environmental, it could be mental health, it could be eating disorders, right? There's a lot of things that go into this. Sleep, it could be sickness, some sort of underlying sickness. The brain's really once there's that total stress load is high and that allostatic load is high, that's where you can potentially run into some issues here. So to sum this part up, so basically we know that women are at risk of underfueling from a low energy availability standpoint. However, maybe that's not the best way to look at it. Maybe based on the female athlete triad, we want to look at some more energy deficiency versus just looking at a calculation, right? And calories may matter, but they may not be at everything. And then three, this last paper I talked about discusses how we need to look at the overall stress load on the body. We need to look at everything going on, and we need to look into that versus just looking at low energy availability. So basically what I want to do the rest of this episode is I want to go over signs you may be at risk of energy deficiency and or you're too high and or you just have too high of stress load on the body. What is that going to look like? And then what I want to talk about are potential common micronutrient gaps, and then what can we actually do about this based on your symptoms and where you're at. So then that way, hey, is it more of a stress load thing, or do I need to increase my calories? Because again, I think, like I said, if people are experiencing any of these, it's often, hey, you just need to increase calories. And I don't think that is always the best play. I think that can backfire for some people here. Let's talk about signs you may be at risk of energy deficiency and or too high of overall stress load. And again, these go hand in hand, right? Because energy deficiency is definitely going to be a stressor on the body. And so that's going to add to total stress load. And so really what I'm getting at here is I want you to have a better idea of, hey, maybe it's all the things that I'm doing that's an issue here. And then maybe down the line, it is a calorie thing, but instead of just adding calories right off the bat, that might not be the right thing for you there. First, I want to go over common risk patterns that we'll see here, right? So who's going to be at a higher risk of one or both of these things? And it's going to be someone that is chronically calorie restricted, constantly restricting their calories, right? You feel like you can't eat over 2,000 calories. You're always trying to diet. You're always cutting more calories. You're trying to eat as little as possible all the time. That's going to be someone that is going to be at a high risk here with this. You're trying to maintain your lowest body weight or body fat year round. So you're scared to see your body weight come up at all. And if you feel like you feel like you're in a surplus, so you need to cut calories, or you're just scared to gain any amount of body fat. So anytime you see scale weight go up, you decrease your calories there, right? So again, this is someone who has a fear of seeing the scale increase, right? Again, that's typically going to come with a lower calorie intake when you see that scale weight go up, and then you live there because it's like, hey, anytime I increase my calories, my weight goes up. I don't like that. So then I'm going to go and cut. Or again, yo-yo dieting, where you maybe take 2 weeks where you're a little bit higher from a calorie standpoint, and then you decrease to go back down to lose weight, right? And it's that sort of yo-yo cycle there with that. You're someone who's high anxiety, high output go personalities, right? This is like a type A personality where someone's just, they always need to be doing something. They need to be doing the next thing. They're go all the time. That's a common risk pattern. And then I would just add someone that has a high training load to this, whether you're an athlete, whether you are someone that just likes to train a lot, you're someone that moves 15 to 20K steps plus per day, you do a lot of events, right? You just have a high training load on top of this. And I don't think you need you don't need all of these. It's, hey, maybe you have a couple of these, right? I think some of these risk patterns go hand in hand, right? Someone that's going to chronic calorie restrict is going to also exercise a lot in that process. That person probably is a high output go type person, right? So I think there's a lot of overlap here, but you don't necessarily have to have all of these. You could have two of them, right? You could be a go personality and have a high training load, and you're going to be at risk of these things. Or you could just be someone that's always just trying to lose weight, and that could be the one thing, and you're going to be at a risk of this. So it's not that you necessarily need to have all of them. Obviously, the more you have, the more likely you are to potentially run into this. So let's talk about some. And again, remember, this can happen for men as well too. So just keep this in mind. I know I'm taking this from a female angle, but this can also happen from a male perspective as well too. So some possible signs are going to be persistent fatigue. So if you're just always tired, or you just have fatigue that lasts for a while and you just feel tired throughout the day, random times, again, a sign that we have either too high of stress load on the body, or we have some form of energy deficiency, or both. And so just real quick before I keep going with this, in this situation, if somebody was presenting with this, I would want to look at their day-to-day stress. Is it a training thing? Before just being like, oh, hey, you have persistent fatigue. Okay, let's just increase your calories. So that's just an example of where we need to look into things a little bit more here. Poor recovery from workouts. You're training and you're finding that it's taking you longer now to recover, and it takes you a while to feel good again. You have sleep issues, right? We're looking at, hey, you're frequently waking, you have poor quality, you're waking up tired, you're tired throughout the day, you're having trouble falling asleep. Again, the sign that we have some sort of issue here that we need to look at. You have a high resting heart rate overall, right? I'd put you at 60 to 70 or above, and or your resting heart rate is higher than what it typically is. And we're talking on average 3 to 5 beats or higher than what it typically is. Or you could look at HRV. HRV is probably going to be slightly better. It's just a little bit harder to take. So that's why I like to have resting heart rate. But again, a low HRV overall, and it is somewhat individual to the person. The lower it is, the more you want to look at this. And then again, lower than what your baseline typically is. So this is where getting your baseline is key for both of these. You're feeling cold often, so especially in your extremities, if you're always feeling cold, again, a sign that you have some sort of energy deficiency and or too high of stress load on the body there, there's multiple different things that we can have that would be stress load on the body. Menstrual changes and or low libido, right? Either one of those. So, if your cycle is becoming longer or shorter or more irregular, again, we'd want to look at that. Now, some of that could be perimenopause, menopausal issues that could be going on. So it can get a little noisy if you are in that age range. But yeah, we're looking at mood changes, anxiety, low motivation, frequent aches, injuries, or flare-ups. Again, you're feeling like you just now have more anxiety, you're feeling more mood changes, you're just not as motivated as you were. Again, a sign that we want to look at things. And then same thing with aches and injuries. If you're getting injured more, you're more achy, again, I think that could go back to the recovery, but we'd want to look at this. Gut issues. So if you're having consistent gut issues, right, we're looking at bloating, constipation very frequently. These are things that's a sign that we would potentially be at risk here of this. You're just having difficulty building muscle or changing your body composition. So you're putting in work, but you're not really seeing your body composition change, or you're just not adding muscle like you feel like you should based on the work you're putting in. And again, understanding that building muscle is a very slow process. So we have to differentiate between those two things. Fat or weight loss resistant despite working hard and tracking your calories and eating relatively low calories. And then getting sick more often and or autoimmune flare-up. A lot of people think that, again, autoimmunity is definitely something that can be genetic for sure, but when somebody has a flare-up, it's usually around some sort of stress or just high stress load on the body, right there. So we'd want to look at that. And again, remember, it can be hard to differentiate between these two, but this is where, like, with the high overall stress load on the body, we come back to that allostasis that they were talking about in that paper. From there, it's really trying to figure out, okay, what is the root? Don't really like to use the word root cause, but what is the big thing that is causing so much stress on the body, right? And again, for some people, it could be, hey, you're not fueling enough, you're not eating enough calories. But again, we'll talk about. So again, just wanted to continue to go over, okay, where is he going with this and my thought process on it. And then under the hood, this is where we can get more actual like subjective numbers based on, I guess it would be, I always get these confused for some reason. It's like simple, but then I just trip myself up on it. Essentially, we're just getting numbers that actually give us data that we can actually see. So this is where getting blood work is what I'm looking at here. So we're looking at lower thyroid output, right? So low free T3. So like I said, there's TSH, there's T4, there's T3, there's reverse T3, there's different thyroid markers that you can get. Really, the first thing we want to look at is free T3 and what that looks like, because that's the active form of thyroid. Again, lower thyroid output is definitely something that's going on here. But in a lot of cases, low energy intake can lead to lower thyroid output, but that's not always the case, right? It could be stress driven as well too. We're looking at higher cortisol tone and sympathetic dominance. So I guess this isn't necessarily, you can get your cortisol obviously taken through blood work, saliva, things like that, but cortisol runs on a circadian rhythm. So like you do want it high at certain times and you want it lower, and then you need to see where that's at throughout the entire day. But I think the big thing would be looking at like sympathetic dominance. So that's essentially, again, a higher resting heart rate, lower HRV. You just feel like you're always on and go, because again, cortisol is good. We want that normal flow of cortisol. Where it can become problematic is if it doesn't come up naturally in the morning, if it's just lower throughout the entire day, or if it's like it doesn't have that circadian peak on it, that's where it can become problematic. And then you can run into issues where then now it's like low, and that's what a lot of people will call adrenal fatigue. That's typically what they mean by that. We're looking at reduced energy output as well too. Again, artificially low maintenance calories, very low calorie intakes to lose and maintain weight. So if that's you, again, definitely a sign that we either have a lot of stress on the body or we're in that energy deficient state there. So artificially low maintenance calories would just be like, okay, I'm eating 1,800 calories and this is my maintenance. If I go over this, I gain weight. Again, you could just have that reduced energy output there. And again, you could look at thyroid. That could definitely help us a little bit there, but it's hard to get this measurement, like an exact number that's going to tell you. Because even if you take your resting metabolic rates, that's not going to tell us, that's not your total daily energy expenditure. There's other things that go into that. So again, this is a little bit of a subjective thing there. Poor glucose regulation and metabolic inflexibility. So again, you're looking at someone that is relatively healthy. They're training, but then they have higher fasting glucose. They have higher fasting insulin. They have a higher A1C. Well, things like that's going to tell us that, hey, this person potentially is just under a lot of stress and or they have some energy deficiencies going on there. And then elevated inflammation as well too, right? So looking at something like HSCRP is a great marker for that. Again, you don't have to have all these, but these are some things that can happen under the hood. That's a sign that we either have too much stress on the body or we're at risk of energy deficiency there. But remember, calories alone don't tell the full story. How much you eat certainly matters. If we're eating way too little relative to our energy output, that is problematic. But we can't underestimate the impact of total stress load as well, right? So you're looking at some things that could add stress to the body. Overall training load and intensity. Again, training is a good stressor, but too much of it and a lot can become problematic. And again, if we're constantly pushing and everything's intense and we're not recovering, whether that's through these other things that I'm about to talk about, that's where it can become problematic. So we need to look at training is a stressor on the body. It's a good one, but if it's not properly dosed, that's where it can be problematic. Body fat levels too, right? So body fat levels that are too low. So again, being too lean for your body, that's a stressor on the body because we need essential levels of body fat. And if we dip below that, and again, a lot of that has to do with habits, but it also has to do with genetics. Some people can maintain lower body fat levels and they're fine. Their body's, hey, this is totally fine. Whereas other people's bodies are like, this is too low. We need to gain some body fat. And so unfortunately, there is a little bit of a genetic makeup there with that will impact that. Again, there's things that we can do to maybe maintain a slightly lower body fat level, but no matter what, even if you did things perfectly, there's going to be a point in time where too low is not going to be good for the body, even if you nail everything there. There's some examples of if you're at really low body fats, this is where you would really need to look at nutrition, really dialing that in. And we're not just talking about eating enough calories, we're talking about micronutrients, enough protein, balanced macros, managing overall stress, like limiting every other, like basically limiting as much stress as you can, really getting your sleep and circadian rhythm dialed in, strategic supplementation to make sure you're hitting all your micronutrients, and then training, right? Again, same thing there. You'd have to make sure that's in line with what we're doing or in line with your recovery. Otherwise, if any of those are off, it's going to be harder and harder for people to maintain leaner and leaner body fat levels. But even if you do those things perfectly, at any point, someone is going to run into where their body's, nope, this is too low. We need more energy on our body there to feel safe. But at the same time, too high of body fat levels are also a stressor on the body. So this is where it gets interesting for someone who maybe is overweight. They're not necessarily lean, but they're also they also have a lot high stress load on their body, and high body fat levels are a stressor on their body. And if they're not eating enough micronutrients, they could be underfueling from that standpoint. So in that situation, the play could be, hey, we need to just make sure you're recovering better. We're minimizing as many stressors on the body as possible and making sure you're hitting your micronutrients, but we may need to push a deficit to get you to a better body fat level. And that's going to take stress off the body there. Low muscle mass can be a stressor on the body. sorry, before I go into muscle mass, so just understand from a body fat perspective, too low is not great, too high is not great either. You need to find that. But again, low muscle mass is a stressor on the body, and it probably just has to do with you're probably just going to have higher body fat levels at that point when you have low muscle mass. But in general, too low muscle mass can be problematic. A good thing to look at would be like FFMI. You're probably looking at under 13 to 15 on that from a female perspective. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it would be around there. Poor cardiovascular fitness, right? So you're looking at, with poor cardiovascular fitness, we're looking at a higher resting heart rate and we're looking at a low VO2 max. Probably, I would say VO2 max under 30 to 40 is where you'd want to look into that there. High life and cognitive stress is going to add to your total stress load. So this is just where your day-to-day stress is going to add to that stress load. This is what people typically think of when they think of stress. Poor sleep quality. So again, if we're not getting that sleep, that's a sign, that's another stressor on the body. And again, could increasing calories be what you need to do? Potentially, but that may not be the case. It could be hey, we need to look at your circadian rhythm habits and get that dialed in. And then once you get that nailed down, now your total stress load is normal and maybe the amount of calories you're consuming is fine. Again, disordered eating behaviors, that's obviously just going to lead to a lot of these issues of micronutrient deficiencies. Again, just unhealthy eating habits don't want to say unhealthy eating habits, but habits that aren't going to help fuel the body as well. Circadian rhythm disruptions, if that's a stressor on the body, there's a lot of different things from a circadian rhythm standpoint that can throw that off. Not getting light in the morning, too much bright light at night, poor meal timing, too much caffeine too late in the day. There's a lot of things that can disrupt that circadian rhythm, and that's in turn probably going to impact your sleep quality, which is going to add stress to the body. Low diet quality or micronutrient gap. So again, we could be eating enough calories, but if we don't have a good diet quality and we have a lot of micronutrient gaps, that's going to be problematic there. Restrictive diets that eliminate food groups, right? So if you're more plant-based, vegan, keto, carnivore, like you're just at a higher risk of more nutrient deficiencies. And because of that, that can add stress to the body. So you'd want to look at that. Bloating, constipation, stomach pain, going to the bathroom too often, right? Like these are signs that there's some gut issues going on. And so that can lead to micronutrient issues. Again, that can lead to just low-grade inflammation throughout the body. If there's gut issues, it can impact sleep quality, can impact just day-to-day life stress. It could impact your training intensity, right? Like every training session you do is more intense on the body. And so there's a lot of downstream impacts on this. And so again, all these factors can start to add up. Some people are going to have more of these. Some people are going to have less than these or less of these. But still, if you start to stack a couple of these, it's going to be problematic. Just one by itself maybe isn't a problem, but let's take overall training load. If you just train a lot, again, not necessarily a problem, you're probably fine. But now if we start to stack, hey, you have a high training load with high intensity, and now you have low body fat levels, maybe you have high cognitive stress, your sleep's impacted, you're not hitting all your micronutrients, and you have some gut issues. All right, now we need to look into that. But here's where it can get problematic is if someone has gut issues, you can't, not in every situation can you just increase calories. You need to be careful with that. We need to be strategic with what we increase. We probably need to make smaller increases in that. So again, in these states too, you can be eating enough calories and still show signs of energy deficiency. So let's go back to high training load and intensity. You could be eating enough calories on paper, but you may still be energy deficient because you're not increasing your calories to that amount. Or you could have a high training load and intensity, be eating enough calories, but your diet quality is not great. Now you're going to be underfueling from that standpoint. You're not going to be hitting your micronutrients. So we need to look at your food quality in that situation there, right? And so again, sometimes though, the solution is reducing stress and improving recovery, not just eating more. So we need to look at what are the sources of this and what's going to make the most sense for that person there. All right, so let's talk about what to do about it. This is not, again, the main takeaway here before I dive into any of these is it's not eat more forever or gain a bunch of weight. Because again, I think that's what people think of when they feel like they're stuck and they have high stress load on their body, or they feel like they have energy deficiency. They've been training a lot and they're lower calories. Again, that could be it. And some things we need to look at is, again, what are the things that they have going on, right? And I think this takes a couple of weeks to really get that data on someone of, okay, what are the big rocks for this person that's going to help take stress off the body? So I think that is what we need to look at first. We need to reduce total stress load. And so priority number one is, okay, what are the things? So getting some data for a couple of weeks and figuring that out. And then from there, figuring out what are the big rocks that are going to reduce total stress load on the person's body. And then from there, it's going to be restore energy availability, right? So making sure they're eating enough for their activity levels and getting to the right body fat that's going to support overall health for you. So again, if it's someone that is just really low body fat, and that's what we deem to be the thing that is problematic, we would need to get that up because that's going to help take some stress load off the body. And the process. Maybe they also have a lot of circadian disruption. We're going to focus on those two things, and that's going to get them into a better state there. And then if it makes sense, we would reintroduce fat loss strategically if and when it makes sense. And so this often means that we would need to reach a body fat range that supports recovery hormones and performance. If you're someone that's scared to gain any amount of body fat, like that could be the big thing for you, where it's like, hey, you need to gain a little bit of body fat. It's not saying you're going to completely gain a ton. If you're trying to lose more body fat and you're already on the leaner side, it's like, hey, for you, we might need to bring this up just a little bit for a period of time, or we just need to reach your true maintenance intake. And that's going to help take stress off the body. And then from there, then we can revisit potentially doing a fat loss phase if you wanted to do that. Maybe for you, maybe for some people, and for most people, it's probably building a little bit of muscle, which would mean that we would need to get to a healthy body fat range to do that if you're on the low end side of things, and making sure you're fueling for that, getting some resistance training in that's focused on progressive overload, eating enough protein, fueling for your training. And this could be even for someone that's at higher body fat levels too, right? It's like for you, maybe it's just building muscle. So it's like, hey, we need to just weight train more and eat enough protein. Maybe we can be in a small deficit potentially for this person, but we have to focus more on fueling versus just trying to lose as much weight as possible. So this means increasing calories to true maintenance before dieting again. So this isn't, hey, maintenance where you don't see your scale weight move at all. It's maintenance where you might see it come up a couple pounds, but we push that and see how high we can push your calories there. And again, this would more so be for someone that is on the leaner side. They do a lot of training, and they're on the leaner side, right? I probably wouldn't necessarily do that for someone that's on the higher end of the body fat range. For them, it's probably more so reducing total stress load and filling in micronutrient gaps there. But for some people, this could also mean temporarily pulling back on training volume or intensity. Again, if that's the big thing that we think would be what you would need. Improving sleep consistency and circadian rhythm. I find that most people need to do this. That's like a base of, hey, if we can work on that helps a lot of people take some stress off their body and just puts their body in a better position. Reducing unnecessary cardio / training, like I said. So if you're just doing a bunch of junk volume training that's not doing a lot, it's just you going out and just doing whatever to just burn calories, we're probably going to cut some of that out. Like we would want our training to be, I would want the person's training to be with a goal and have a specific purpose, not to just go out and burn as many calories as possible. Maybe it's just, hey, you're just going to move and that's what we're doing, but we're watching our intensity. We're not just going out to burn a bunch of calories just for the sake of it. So reducing junk volume in training. Again, maybe for some people, it's fueling training with enough carbohydrates. Again, that's probably going to be for the person that has a high training load, is on the leaner side, and things like that. It's trying to find ways to reduce unnecessary stressors in their day-to-day, right? Whether that's practicing things that are going to help them manage their stress a bit better, to not be bothered by those things. Maybe it's, hey, for some people, it could be switching jobs that they felt like they need to get out of. So there's a lot of different things from that perspective. And then again, like I said, improving diet quality and micronutrients there. Like I said, we can think of this from two ends of the spectrum, or actually I'll go over three different client scenarios here, all spread out. Actually, before I do that, I want to go over common nutrient gaps that we'll see here in women specifically that we would want to look at. I guess even B vitamins too. We're looking at vitamin D, right? So making sure you're getting plenty of that. And if you don't, you can get this done through your blood work. If you're not at the right range, adding in some vitamin D or getting out in the sun more could be helpful from that perspective. Iron's another big one, especially for menstruating women and or women that do have a restrictive diet. We would want to look at iron. Again, you'd maybe look at your ferritin on your blood work. Zinc is another one that women do need and can be low in, especially if they don't eat meat. And saying that, you do want to be careful with high doses of zinc all the time, because with zinc to copper ratio, you want to make sure that's in line. And so if you don't eat enough copper and or you just eat you take a lot of supplements with zinc, that can become problematic. We're looking at magnesium, fish oil, especially omega-3s, DHA and EPA. We're also looking at and then potentially calcium if somebody doesn't eat dairy there from a bone health perspective. And then potentially B vitamins as well too. Those are another common nutrient gaps in women there. And again, most of these also apply to men, except for maybe iron. Men can still be iron deficient, but iron's probably less of a concern. Zinc's important, but again, same thing. We want to make sure we're not overdoing it. And then maybe calcium's not as important, but still is important. And if you're not eating dairy, you would potentially want to look into that there. So again, most of these still apply to men. There's just a few differences from that perspective. So I have three avatars here that I want to go over. So let's talk about avatar one. So this is a person that is going to be lean. They do a lot of training. They do have some sleep disruption. They have some gut issues, and they're high stress. They're that high output person that I was talking about. So they train 6-7 days a week, sometimes twice a day. They move 15, 20,000 plus steps per day. They have a full-time job, family, everything like that. Everyone I'm going to go over here is 30 plus. Most of them have families, everything like that there. All right. So what we would do in this situation for this person is I'm going to look at, okay, because they're lean, we probably do want to make a small calorie increase here. And I want to make a small calorie increase because of the gut issues, right? Like a lot of people here in this situation would be like, oh, let's just throw up calories to their maintenance and just they need to eat more. Yes, probably, but we also need to look at those gut issues as well too, right? And just slamming a bunch of calories in this person may not be great. So that's why I want to make some small calorie increases. And we need to be okay with small amounts of weight gain because you probably need to get that body fat percentage up just a little bit there at least, but at least eat enough because you're coming at this from, and again, this person also is eating low calories, let's say sub 1800. And so you're hitting two things there. You're hitting the low calories, you have high training, and you're on the leaner side, right? So it's like that, not two things, you actually have triple whammy there. So we'd want to look at small calorie increases in this situation. And again, you're okay with a little bit of weight gain, especially from day to day and initially when we increase calories there. We also really would want to look at their micros and their macros, right? So making sure, okay, we still need to hit, we need to look at if they have any nutrient gaps that I talked about, if we need to potentially supplement with that. We want to look at their overall, I'd want to look at their food log, their overall diet quality, see where that's at, and see what foods we need to add in or what we're doing there. Are we consuming too much fiber potentially? Are we consuming too much quote unquote diet foods, high food volume foods, right? That's typically what you'll see with this person, with this avatar as well too. Are we, from a macro standpoint, let's make sure those are balanced, right? This person's gonna, again, and probably in all these situations, they're gonna go lower carbs. So we need to make sure we're well balanced, getting enough protein, but not overdoing protein either, because this person's probably going to be on the higher end of protein. Also looking at fats, right? I feel like this person would be high protein, low to moderate fats, low to moderate carbohydrate, probably low to moderate if you just looked at the number, but low for their how much they're training. And then, like I said, low fats there, right? And so we'd want to, and probably not good fat sources. So we'd want to look at all those things, improving their fat sources, making sure they're eating enough fat, increasing their carbohydrates to match their output, and then potentially lowering protein or keeping it the same there. I'd want to look at their circadian alignment, making sure that's in check, right? Because if they have sleep disruption, that's probably a sign that their circadian rhythm's not checked. Is it, hey, morning light? Is it less caffeine throughout the day? Better caffeine timing? Is it a better wind down routine? Is it sleep consistency? Is it, hey, you shouldn't be training super intense right before bed either, right? So we'd want to look at that. And then the other thing we would do is we dial back training intensity or manage it, maybe also reduce volume a little bit, right? Like we'd want to make sure that they're not just going out there and just training just to train and to burn calories because they feel like they always need to be doing things. We need to moderate our intensity. We need to potentially moderate our frequency for a short period of time while we're adjusting here. Maybe we need to look at less movement overall there. So these would be the main things that I would potentially do with this person. So in this case, it would be a calorie increase, but we still need to look at the overall stress load on the person there. Now let's take maybe somebody in the middle here where it's like they're not super lean, they're not overweight either, but they do like to train a lot. They're on what we would call low cals most of the time, but they're not super lean, not overweight either. So it's like maybe they've hit a little bit of a plateau from a nutrition perspective. Sleep is fine. They're sleeping 8 hours, right? They're like, yeah, my sleep's good. I sleep 8 hours. I'm good to go there. They don't feel stressed, but they're a mom, they work full time. They're also a wife, right? So they don't feel stressed. They say, oh, I'm not stressed. I'm good to go, but they have a lot going on. And so maybe their stress load on the body is a little bit higher than what they think. And they have a lot of weekend activities, so weekends get thrown out. So in this situation, I wouldn't necessarily increase calories right off the bat. I would keep them the same. Okay. I would look at food log. I'd want to make sure their macros are in check. Look at those common nutrient gaps that I talked about. And looking at their macros, right? Are they balanced or are those out of whack? Are we trying to fit in too many tasty foods? It's like, hey, maybe during the week you're low calorie and then the weekends come and it's now you're eating super low protein, super high carb fat there. So we want to make sure that we're fueling throughout the week, not just during the week and eating low calorie in the week. And then on the weekends, we're doing whatever there. And again, I would want to get some structured training in there focused on adding muscle. I feel like for a lot of these people, the issue is they need to it's not that they need to maybe stop eating lower-ish calories or they need to not fat loss diet. It's, hey, we need to make sure our training is focused on adding some muscle and improving conditioning. We're not just, again, same thing here. We're not just going to train, right? Again, maybe this person's doing a couple of days of group classes. They're just, again, trying to get the highest heart rate they can in their training, and they don't really have structure with their training, but they do train a lot. And so I'd want to get some structure with this person with their training. And then we would really work on lifestyle stuff, right? Looking at their weekend habits. Hey, what are some things we can do to make sure that our macros macros and micros stay in better places during the week or during the weekend. What's your circadian rhythm? Because I feel like for this person, because they have a lot of weekend activities, their circadian rhythm is going to be out of whack. So we want to make sure that's in check, and especially on the weekends. And then definitely putting in some stress management, right, for this person, making sure that they take some time for themselves and to slow down and downregulate, working on breathing, stuff like that, because that's going to have a huge impact for somebody like this on there. It would be the same for everyone, but I feel like for this specific avatar, this probably is the most common one. And they're also like not really sure on what to do, right? This would be the person that's going to hear, oh, I need to increase calories, and they increase calories, and then that doesn't work for them, right? They increase calories and now they gain a bunch of body fat, right? Because they don't have these things in check. The calories weren't really the issue. It was more so the other details, right? The circadian rhythm stuff, they need to get their training in line. The weekend is killing them, right? So we want to look at that versus just increasing calories with this person. And then we have the third avatar. They're more on the higher end, right? So they have higher body fat levels. They've had a history of yo-yo dieting, restrictive type dieting, right? Maybe they sleep a decent amount, but they still feel tired, right? And then they have phases of a lot of training and really on top of it. And then they have none to little, right? For this person, the problem isn't low calories. It's not a low calorie issue. So we wouldn't necessarily want to be like, hey, let's increase calories here. This is a calorie issue, right? It's going to be more of everything else. So again, same thing. Like we'd want to find a calorie amount that they stick with, even if it's a small deficit, that's fine. Or maybe for a little bit, it's a large deficit, but we really want to focus on making sure they nail their micros and macros, right? Again, balance for whatever their caloric intake is, but making sure they have those common nutrient gaps filled and they're not overlooking that. Fiber would be important, but again, just not overdoing fiber either. We'd want to look at, again, circadian alignment here. I think that's super important. That to me is at the baseline of all these people, and they're going to feel better if they can get that in check. However, what I would want to potentially look at in this avatar is potential for sleep apnea. So you'd want to definitely look at that there. More consistent movement versus feeling like they need to go hard to get in shape or to lose weight, right? We just want that consistent movement. Hey, let's get you to move more. Let's get 6 to 10K steps per day. Let's get a couple workouts in, just getting you moving, getting consistent with training, and that's going to really help you overall, and it's going to help with your recovery. You're not going to get these highs and lows of training a lot and then not training enough. So we need to make sure that's in check. And then a mix of cardio and training, right? So doing some cardio training that gets that heart rate into that 120 to 140-ish range to start, to get them moving more, help with metabolic flexibility, help build that conditioning, help with their VO2 max, and then a couple of days of weight training, right? Because we do want to make sure they build some muscle, but I don't think they need to go on a training program that's 5 days a week of building muscle type training, bodybuilding style training. They probably just need 2 to 3 days. And then the rest of the time it's, hey, let's get that movement up that you can sustain. And it's not like you feel like you're trying to kill yourself every time you go into the gym there with that. So those are 3 different avatars. Like I said, I think the people I work with and the people that are listening probably fall more in the super lean, the leaner side of things. And then the middle kind of ground there. I would say the middle ground is probably the most common. Obviously there are some people that are on the higher end side of things there. So I hope this was helpful. Again, I think the main takeaway was that, one, if you're female, you are at a risk of underfueling, but that doesn't mean that it's a calorie issue per se, right? There's other things that are going on. And again, I think micros are a big one, especially from a calories, if it fits your macro standpoint. But then again, there's a lot of life stress type stuff and other things that are adding stress to your body that you could be overlooking that are the problems and not necessarily just calories. As I talked about in those avatars, definitely increasing calories would be something that we'd want to do and for certain people, but it's not hey, that has to be this for everyone there. So let me know if you guys have any questions. I hope this was helpful. Hopefully this cleared up some things for you. If it was more confusing for you, definitely let me know. Reach out to me, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. And that's it for now. And I will talk to you guys soon.